So, prior to the execution of any idea, there must be a plan. When it comes to digital currency in the Caribbean, it's no different, as Stephen Phillips and Bartlett Morgan will now join the CANTO 2021 screen for a discussion on the blueprint for financial technology. Stephen Phillips is the founder and principal consultant at IMHOTEP, Imhotep Consulting Inc., an award-winning technology scientist. Stephen specializes in financial technology innovation and distributed technologies, focusing on blockchain solutions, digital assets, and the crypto economy since 2016. Stephen helps organizations, institutions, and governments with executing strategic and product initiatives, spearheading critical technical solutions aimed at digital transformation and market domination. Bartlett D. Morgan is an attorney at law with an established track record in the digital law and policy space. His client base is multi-sectoral and covers banking and finance, fintech, telecommunications, distribution, tourism, and digital media. He has advised regional regulators, leading global digital platforms, financial institutions, startups, and their investors. So these are the two gentlemen. We have 2 sessions left. These 2 gentlemen are now going to join us on screen, and the moderator for the final 2 segments of CANTO 2021 is our new young director, Mr. Mark Reynolds. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Wendell. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for CANTO. As Wendell has ably stated, I'll be the moderator for the remaining 2 segments of CANTO 2021. It has been an excellent and a stellar event, and thank you to the Secretariat and my fellow directors and chairman, Mr. David Cox, in what has been a shifting discussion in terms of technology. And in looking at these sessions here, I have actually looked to focus on fintech and fintech the future, and also future leaders in this sector as well, emerging minds, and as he has said, young director, and I've sought for young upcoming talent and experienced talent. But today, what we're looking at is fintech, the blueprint for success in the future. And now, even with COVID being the topical issue that it is, we're looking to see how best we can pivot for this sector being coming to the forefront. So I'm going to hand it over to Bartlett and Stephen to give some opening comments and to guide us in these discussions. Bartlett, let's start with you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me, and to the host. I think this is, I think, a very timely conversation for us to be having. The future is now, as some of us like to say. But importantly, we speak of fintech and so on, and certainly from my perspective, what I think is certainly critical in the context of being at CANTO is not to perhaps isolate fintech and to speak of its potential in isolation, but rather to focus, certainly from my end, the conversation around fintech and the potential supportive and our collaborative role that can be played by telcos. And when we start to think of it in that way, we can immediately think of a number of ways and approaches to this issue of collaboration and synergies between both spaces. In the first instance, to my mind, I think it's important to point out that there are huge benefits on either side. I mean, so obviously, from the perspective of emerging technologies and fintech companies in particular, what you get when you get access to a teleco is that, first of all, well, there's this ridiculously wide reach. The other day I looked at some statistics that said that globally, 93% or upwards of 93% of the world's population lives within range of a cell tower. And so if you are to use that to contextualize what we're talking about, then it gives you a sense of the theoretical reach of partnering with a teleco to have your products and services delivered. And there's also obviously the marketing sort of side to it as well. You have huge marketing reach just by virtue of being connected with a particular telco or a group of telcos. Now, I think for the telcos, certainly in the Caribbean context, it's also hugely beneficial as well. Without perhaps jumping into too much detail, the reality is, I'm speaking to an audience of persons who are already sort of, as we'd say, in the know. And so, many of you would already have a sense that realistically, in the mobile space at least, you see some indication that we're heading to a point where there's kind of this sort of topping out, or we're leveling off, simply because the mobile penetration rate is already just so ridiculously high. And so one of the implications of that potential is that, directly speaking, certainly the profit margins aren't going to be what they used to be 10 years ago, when there was aggressive growth in virtually all the markets across the region. And so the direct implication of that is that for profit motivated entities, which is the vast majority of telcos in the region, you need to find additional ways to bring home the bacon. And I would argue that in collaborating and partnering with fintech type operations, it provides that new fertile ground for continued growth for telcos, simply because, and as we've seen from a number of different sectors and industries, you can just look generally. If you create essentially an ecosystem of products and services, your client or customer is far less likely to ever leave you, because there are just so many different things that you provide that are beneficial. Now, if in addition to providing telephony services and mobile internet and so on, you're now telling me you're providing these fintech-based solutions that I can readily use anywhere, anytime, to get real transactions done and in real time, then that's another reason to never leave you. And so loyalty is built into the package when telcos get into the fintech space. And I don't want to sort of go speak ad nauseum at this point. It really is just sort of opening remarks. And so I just really want to leave it there for now, just to kind of set the stage that certainly I believe that there's significant promise, even beyond what we've already seen, because there are a number of players in the region already sort of jumping in and who've seen the winds of change and so on. But I think my argument is that there's even more opportunity for synergies and for collaborative approaches to work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Bartlett. And thank you for giving us that insight in terms of you being a practitioner. However, there's a flip side to the coin where it comes to actually the industry and the nuts and bolts and actually being there. And Stephen, your presence here is quite timely, because BIT has been an outstanding leader in terms of providing the safe space for entities to be able to test their innovations before they go to market with it. So on top of that note, being the VP for Special Projects, Stephen Phillips, I hand it over to you to give your opening statements on this topic. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And I also want to thank the organizers for CANTO for extending an invitation and allowing me to share my thoughts on digital currency and a blueprint for financial technology in the Caribbean. So we all know the Caribbean has many challenges, those related to resilience, financial inclusion, financial literacy, as well as access to online financial services, as some of the other panelists also mentioned. While many territories are making great progress with regards to addressing these problems, I think it's fair to say that more transformation is necessary to enhance the competitiveness of the Caribbean region on a global level. So, specifically, central banks and regulators in the region are leveraging financial technology to address some of these issues, those specifically looking at financial inclusion and economic development and transformation. Central bank digital currencies, or commonly called CBDCs, are one example of a new technology capable of reducing costs with financial services and broadening access to digital payments for all citizens in the Caribbean. This new financial market infrastructure provides an opportunity for telcos, banks, financial services providers to enter the market and drive innovation while reducing costs and enhancing convenience and value to the consumer. So in closing, Updates to existing legislation and regulatory frameworks form part of the blueprint for facilitating the digital transformation towards more competitive economies in the region. So I look forward to the questions and the discussion with my co-panelist, Mr. Morgan, where we will offer some insight into the changing regulatory landscape for the region and characteristics of the blueprint for financial technology in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, right back at you. In terms of just crafting the arguments and also discussion, what has BIT's experience been in the region in terms of leaders or entities being first to market? What have been, in short, their pitfalls and what have been their strengths?
Sure. So I would like to suggest that our technology is our main strength. We build blockchain-based technology, which facilitates digital payments, leveraging the security of blockchain. And that provides a lot of comfort, especially for those individuals who may be skeptical when they're thinking about changing their thought processes around how they interact with money and how they interact with financial services. Challenges, I would say, are around financial literacy. A lot of segments of the society are not very comfortable with financing. There's a lot. The region as a whole is very cash-based, and that change is very difficult. There's a need for lots of education. There's a need for lots of marketing. So that, to me, is one of the biggest challenges in creating that shift and that transformation to create the comfort. People can start to trust these digital payments a bit more, and then we can see the economies reaping the benefits from increased velocity of money, etc.
Stephen, those are actually the points that that was actually coming to mind even before the question, because in just looking at it, I'll turn to Bartlett on it on this point, that there is an interest. Even, for example, in Guyana here, we have mobile money, which is a product of GTT. And we find that it is an easy platform to use. There's an interest in it, and it has been since, for example, throughout the pandemic, we have seen exponential growth in terms of the interest. And you have a lot of SMEs pulling to use it. We're having partnership with banks. It has all banks and entities here that are seeing the utility of it. But to my mind, I still think that there needs to be some form of a bridge in terms of regulatory and getting the assistance from governments in going behind, and there being stronger public and private partnerships. So Bartlett, to your point, being in the private sector and now advising several entities across the region and even in Barbados, what is your take on it?
So here's where it gets interesting, right? Because if you look at markets globally,
correct,
even within the region where there has been significant take-up of fintech products, there are certain sort of, I guess you could probably call it trends at this point, as it regards the role of regulators and the regulatory environment. And this is not at all meant to be controversial, but the facts are that in jurisdictions where the regulators take, and I'm using my words very loosely here, and I'm trying to be careful, they take a sort of more welcoming approach to new innovation and to disruptive technologies. What you find is, because the hurdles for those technologies to get to the actual market and to operate in the market and to sort of naturally figure out where they fit, based on those economic forces and so on, you find that because those hurdles are less, the likelihood of those fintech products flourishing is greater. But where you find yourself in an environment where there is extremely tight regulations, you have strict AML rules, and how those, not just having the strict rules, but how they are interpreted by the regulators, it has a significant impact of roll out a lot of these fintech products. And they're practical examples of this. every single time people think about fintech, right? The starting point generally for fintech in the modern era is M-Pesa, right? Everybody talks
Right.
about M-Pesa, and the wonderful story it is in Kenya and so on. But what we don't talk about is what naturally happens when you have a product that's wildly successful. You naturally try to grow, right, into new
Right.
markets, and that their attempts at growth has been somewhat checkered. And the reasons are multiple. There are multiple reasons, but a part of it is because you had some jurisdictions, for example, when you tried to get into South Africa, and the regulatory regime was just so much more, let's call it sophisticated. It's a lot more checks and balances, everybody checking on everything. You try to do something, you say no, you need to do it in this more complex way. So the long and short of it is, it was really hard to have the level of take up in that market that you had in Kenya. And I am arguing that a part of that has to do with the regulatory posture. And so if we're to take that conversation to the Caribbean context and apply it, you see similar things happening because there are a number of attempts throughout the Caribbean at rolling out different types of fintech related innovations. Number in almost any jurisdiction you can think of, you can point to a bunch of different service offerings and so on. And what you find is that in the in those jurisdictions where the regulators allow things to either flourish naturally in the market, or probably sandbox type thing or what have you, then there's significant take up if the product is good, because that's the other thing.
Right.
If the fit isn't there, it's just not there. But assuming that the product has a certain level of fit and you apply it in the market, there's take up.
Right.
They're regulated. There's a telco, in Haiti, and look at their fintech innovations there. It flourished objectively. It did well. GTT's own product, in my estimation, has been doing quite well. And in my view, both of those things have something in common: the regulatory posture. I'm not going to belabor the point, so I'll end it right there. But I think that it says that ultimately the regulators need to take a more active role and to determine what kind of outcomes do they want in their jurisdictions in terms of fintech take-up.
All right. I want to add to that really quickly and just
Yes.
say that we recognize that technology leads regulation. And I would offer to fintechs and telcos and banks that are looking to do innovative things that they do have a responsibility to help educate the regulators and to show them the value in what they're bringing to the market. And that's it. I think that has been successful for us at BIT, working closely with the regulators. Because technology is changing every day, and the regulator, it's not really their role to be up to speed, and they are more focused on protecting the market, protecting the consumers, and providing supervision as opposed to being up to speed on technology. So there is some onus on the new players to find the regulatory frameworks. Some Caribbean territories, including Barbados, have sandboxes as well as new payments legislation that can be leveraged. So it is a challenge. It is difficult, but you can surpass it. And BIT is one example where we've been able to do that.
And it's funny, again, Stephen, that you should mention that, because I think that the regulator plays a significant role. I still think that even in MMG, even for example M-Pesa and in South Africa, or Africa in general, they have been driving the Africa Moonshot projects throughout the COVID region, COVID time frame from 2020 coming to 2021. And we find that even though there's a high level of internet penetration, in terms of developing a digital identity, you find that there still isn't that the penetration prevents persons from doing that. So for example, persons will have Facebook, they will have Instagram, they'll be developing their digital identity, trying to use it to monetize themselves on the internet. But you find that when it comes to actually doing the check and balances, it gets a bit difficult. So I'm wondering, in terms of innovation, in terms of, and it's going to the next session, in terms of educating persons, what do you think telcos need to do? Because I honestly believe it is an untapped resource that telcos are not using, because we're just still stuck around data, voice, copper, broadband, internet, and then you have this as a value-added service.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen, for example, where Digicel have done it in terms of having a variety of apps, and in terms of getting persons to add that stickiness to their product.
Yeah.
But what can we do now to educate persons? What is it? Make a call to the telcos right now, because you're at CANTO, is the National Association for National Telecoms Operators. Make a call to the telcos and put an onus on them.
Mm-hmm. Was that one for me?
That's for both of you, coming from the various spheres that you are. So I'll start with you, Stephen, being in the industry and at the cut and thrust of it.
Yeah, I think Bartlett mentioned this briefly during his initial comments.
Right.
Telcos are uniquely poised because the penetration is there. Everyone has not just one phone, but maybe even two in some cases. So solving the last mile problem, the ability to deliver the solution, telcos are uniquely poised. I think that partnership with fintechs is a good opportunity because they can focus on their core business and allow the fintech to provide the over-the-top service on top of the telco network, zero rate the app data, and allow users to find value. But one of the key things about the uptake when we look at adoption is that these solutions, these fintech solutions, need to drive clear value. Humans, as you know, we are not easy to change. So if I'm accustomed paying with cash or doing something a particular way, the new solution needs to add value above and beyond what I'm accustomed doing to then allow me to change my behavior. So the stickiness is one thing, creating beautiful apps and solutions to solve real world problems, the marketing, the education, in a nutshell, it's a multifaceted approach. Access is one thing, but there's a lot that goes into creating a successful product that can actually transform lives.
Excellent. Bartlett, over to you.
Yeah, I think from the telcos perspective, and without trying to repeat what has been said already, essentially the question is, well, what next? What to do next to get to the next level in this whole thing? So, but to answer that question, you kind of have to look at the environment that you find yourself in. I think certainty plays a big role sometimes in success. And a part of the certainty sometimes can come from, funny enough, the regulatory environment. If you know exactly what the parameters of the game are, you're better able to play the game than if you don't. And so I think, and this is also sort of latching on to something that Stephen had mentioned, by the way, that it's important for telcos to start more actively lobbying for the kinds of environments that they want. There are lots of situations, even with your competitors, where I think you can recognize as private sector parties in the same industry that broadly a certain kind of environment, certainly from a regulatory perspective, is ideal, and therefore having identified that as a shared truth, to then go forward to lobby the regulators to help to create that kind of environment that you need. So, for example, the whole question of payment system, or laws around payments and cryptos and so on, and what you recognize as fiat versus not fiat. On what basis can a fintech connect with a traditional bank? Is there some regulatory framework that forces the banks, who tend to be a bit conservative sometimes in terms of playing with the newer fintech guys, to force them to connect legal, that kind of a thing? Because as I've already posited, I think it's in the interest of telcos to line up with fintechs. It's in their mutual interest to do so. And so by extension, I believe telcos have a role to play in arguing for these kind of environments, especially in situations where the telcos themselves outright own the fintech ventures. You're essentially arguing for yourself and for your own success. Because, for example, to go back to the prior example, if you're in a situation where, based on the nature of the fintech venture, let's say it's something to do with payments, but perhaps it's something, a bit more, crypto, cryptos and so on, and be able to use one crypto or trade it with another one or what have you. The banks, from an AML perspective, are going to do this. Unless there's a regulatory framework that says, relax, guys, once they've done certain AML checks, and we'll be checking on them to do that, you can interconnect. You can allow them to send some funds to bank accounts, that kind of a thing, and back and forth. Unless there's that kind of stuff in play, then you're not going to find the environment in terms of the traditional financial sector being as responsive to you as a fintech player as you'd like them to be, in turn allowing you to actually get to market with your product and really flourish the way you'd want to. So that's my call to arms to the telcos. Decide on the kind of environment that you want, put aside your instinctively competitive nature, and once you've agreed on those things that you collectively want at the local level within the jurisdictions, start pushing for them, start lobbying for them. And as Stephen rightly mentioned, there's a role to play in educating regulators too, because your regulator can't know everything. You're already so busy out in fires and trying to keep your jurisdiction above board and that kind of stuff, so you're not gray listed or blacklisted by OECD every 2 weeks or what have you. You don't have time to be necessarily catch up with everything that's going on, but the telecos are, the fintechs are. Educate them on the kind of environment you want.
Thank you, Bartlett. Thank you, Stephen, for that insight. And just to close, what I have found, and it's funny that you mentioned the banks as a partner. They are going to play a critical role in shifting the mindset. And I find that, in doing research, fintech pretty much emerged out of banks trying to modernize their back office operations. So it's like pretty much the accident has now become the blessing. Or the byproduct has now become the blessing and has moved to the front. Persons now, for example, with MMG, and I'm not trying to advertise for my company's product, but you're able to pay. You're able to pay your bills from the comfort of your home, and I don't think persons really understand the economy of time. And it's a matter of playing to those benefits for persons, for entities to be able to give, especially with COVID-19, the ease of mind to be able to operate and be able to use their time for their families, for their homes, for their jobs. So just in closing statements, Stephen, what is it that you would say, not just to, you have to address the telcos, but just generally, what are the points, the high points that you believe that entities need to look at? Me as a person, as a consumer, my privacy, my rights, what is it that you would like to close on for today and at this session?
Sure, and thank you. For me, I think that Bartlett and I both recognize and agree that there is a tremendous opportunity for fintechs and telcos to partner. I think the landscape has changed in the last 5 years. Initially, fintechs were seen as a threat to business models, but now I think we can recognize that there's more clarity in the role of banks and the role of telcos, and fintechs offer an opportunity to add additional services that can drive adoption and can drive value to the end consumer. And I think for me, that's the key point, that don't see fintechs as a threat, see them as an opportunity. They can drive additional value to your clients and make your products even better. And I'll end with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. And Bartlett, your closing statement.
Yeah, there are a couple of things I think to be mindful of, because the question is usually, going forward from here as a teleco or a fintech player or what have you, what next? And I think a big part of that is being mindful of the changing landscape that we're operating in. Many people who know me publicly associate me with a lot of digital law stuff, including like privacy and so on. And we've been seeing a wave of change in that space the last maybe 5 years or so. And so increasingly, most of the jurisdictions in the region are heading towards having that additional layer of consumer protection, because in a way, privacy really is about consumer protection.
Yes.
So you're going to have to be mindful in building out your products to be mindful of these new additional requirements when you build out. That's important. I think the other big takeaway is, I think telcos and our fintechs, as they enter markets, they need to be more mindful of the nuances of the market. There's no such thing as one Caribbean when it comes to the specifics of the market. And it's really a big error to try to paint the entire region in that way because, for example, differences in the level of mobile penetration, differences in the level of persons who are banked versus unbanked, differences in literacy rates, all these things account for the kind of products that will fly and won't. And so I think I just remind persons keen on getting into this space that they have to do their part to do their homework properly. And there's no one size fit all solution for the region. I think I'll stop there for now and head back over to you.
Thank you, Bartlett, and thank you, Stephen, for your comments and your guidance today. I have found the discussion to be very fruitful and educational. And I just for the persons here, this really is the future, and we're going to become more and more contactless, and therefore considerate of our safety. And it's a matter of getting those around us being in the telecom and the digital space, to educate the average man in understanding what we are dealing with, because it is the future is here. It is here in the United States. It is here in Europe. They have actually developed laws and regulations governing cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all of these practices. And we, in order to be vehicles of investment and change, must come to bear with it and come to bear with the changes that we're facing, and put it to use. So on that note, if there are any questions from those in attendance, I would like to thank on behalf of CANTO, Bartlett Morgan and Stephen Phillips for bringing your expertise here today and engaging us and with the future, because you being here, our leaders are the future and will be guiding us forward to understanding how we manage our money in a digital space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right.